Hi, I'm Katie, and this is the Free Art and Design School podcast, web series, whatever. And I have yet another guest who has agreed to join me. Not that he really had a choice. This is Luke, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, Katie. Yeah, sure thing. My name is Luke. I'm here talking about art and design, hopefully. I don't consider myself much of an artist, which I think will be a point of conversation today.
Yes.
And perhaps we should disclose that Katie and I have a relationship. Katie's my girlfriend.
Yes, it's very important for the seriousness of the podcast. Yeah, so
Yeah, I want to make sure we're above board.
so one of the main reasons that I wanted to ask Luke to do this, other than the fact that this morning Luke had complained that I had not asked him to be on the podcast, was that Luke does not consider himself an artist. And that pains me dearly as someone who, A, is an artist, and B, is dating Luke, and Luke is in many ways better at certain kinds of drawing and art and design than I am, which he will contest. Um,
Yes,
but
gladly.
but you do have a really extensive history of design. And if you want to talk about like the work you did at Berkeley and the club you were in, and then some of the like video games that you've made, I think that would make my point if you would like to talk about that.
Yeah, of course, I can make your point. So I've always enjoyed kind of drawing, visual art kind of stuff when I was young. When I went to college, I sort of expanded that and I joined a club at Berkeley called Innovative Design. Broadly speaking, Innovative Design was a graphic design club. So we would take on clients from mainly on campus organizations. So if there are like other clubs on campus or maybe a research group or something like that, they would come to us with, hey, we need a logo, or hey, we need to design a bunch of posters, or something in that vein. And we would have a team that would basically go and do that. So as part of the club, we were separated into a bunch of different teams, and they would kind of like take on these clients. Occasionally, it'd be off-campus stuff, but normally it was sort of people who were already on campus, so a little bit lower stakes than a sort of real design client. So I
Yeah.
was in this club for a little bit, worked on some of these projects, and eventually I moved to the other section of the Innovative Design Club. This is sort of like my last year, I suppose, at Berkeley, which is that I was teaching a sort of class in the basics of Photoshop and Illustrator, so the two Adobe products. This was Berkeley has these sort of student-led classes called decals. Um, I think probably other schools have similar things, but they're called decals at Berkeley. And the idea is you can have like a student group or organization that is in charge of like defining the curriculum and having this class. They're normally pretty easy, and because it's students running them, they can be a very eclectic range of topics. So, for example, I took a decal in making comics, actually. But the one I was teaching is in basically how to use Photoshop and Illustrator. So not really like fundamentals of design or even art, really, just like how do you literally use these tools. And since then, I went into a career, software engineering, that doesn't have a whole lot of art as like a major component of it, mainly your coding. I work in video games now, still doing software engineering now, so still like, you know, maybe a little bit closer to art, but still sort of divorced from the kind of that kind of world of drawing and design.
Well, your particular role at the video game company, because there are
Yes.
also like obviously very art intensive roles at a company like that.
Yeah, of course. We do have artists that are at my company, some very good artists who do 3D design. And a lot of games will also have like 2D graphic designers, concept artists, all that kind of stuff. That is perhaps unfortunately not what I do. I'm mainly working with the computers.
But that also leads into my next question, which is if you could describe um, some of the video games that you've made on the side personally and like the engineering and art aspects that go into a project like that.
Yeah, of course. I worked on a number of side projects and games. Only two of them have really come to any sort of point of completion. So I have a lot of started projects that didn't go anywhere, or didn't go very far at least. I have two projects that did go a little bit farther. So one of them was a 2D platformer. So if you don't play games, that's kind of like an old school Mario game. You're basically trying to get from left to right. The game is two dimensional. So You're like jumping up and down and moving platforms and like avoiding enemies, that kind of thing. And another was a top-down roguelike. A roguelike is a category game where instead of playing through levels and saving as you go, you sort of play a run. And normally there's a large randomized element to a roguelike. So you join a run, you go through until you die, and then you start all the way back over at the beginning. And since the map or maybe the enemies or various attributes of the game are randomized, it's kind of different each time. So the idea isn't that you just play once, but you play many times, sometimes with the goal of getting to the end, but sometimes just have fun and see how far you get. Both of those games, obviously a lot of coding, but also a lot of art. I was working on them by myself, so I didn't have anybody particular to help me on the art. So I kind of tried to keep it pretty simple. I did a lot of pixel art, so especially like really low res kind of pixel art. So you'd have like a character that might be like 8 by 8 pixels, that kind of thing. And partly that was because there's a lot of art that you have to make for a game. I mean, if a game has any kind of scale, you might have, at least 15 enemies, even for a really small game like I'm making. And the biggest thing is you need to come up with like animations for all of them. Potentially multiple if you need like different walk cycles for moving different directions or attack animations, all that kind of stuff. So really like I almost centered the whole game around like how can I minimize the amount of intense art that I have to make, just because I knew that if I was making if an individual piece of the game required like too much effort into the art department, I'd never get to the coding, especially working on it myself. And I wasn't doing this full time either. This was just on the side. So I chose pixel art because it has its own challenges. It's not easy per se, but it's a lot simpler than making an animation where you need to have like 60 frames per second, right? And if you're doing like a 2D animation, it's a lot of frames, a lot of drawing to get that done. But I was able to cheese it a little bit with pixel art.
So you did all the art and the animation for these 2 games and then some other projects that you've had.
Yeah.
Okay.
2 small games, but yes.
Okay. Still more than I've never made a video game. So
well, I think if the qualifications for being an artist is you have made a video game, I think that most artists wouldn't qualify.
Exactly. Which means that you are more qualified than most artists at being an artist. So
next time I see Van Gogh, I'll let him know.
You just look in a mirror. Don't cut your ears off, though. Anyways, I thought you could also talk a little bit about the comics that you make and how you got into making comics. Maybe I've forgotten. I didn't realize you took a comics class. Maybe you told me that you took a comics class in college. But were you interested in comics before that? Like, what's the story?
Yeah, I guess I'd say I was interested. Most people, when they're kind of interested in comics, they're reading X-Men or stuff like that. I had a few graphic novels that, as a kid, I really liked. I had the Bone series was a great graphic novel. I loved that. Was absolutely obsessed with it as a kid. But I wasn't really into any of the weekly edition kind of superhero comics or some of the more traditional comics type stuff. But I did really like the other type of comics, what you might call like the funny pages or something in the newspaper. So our family got the newspaper, and every day we got it, which I don't think was every day, but certainly, maybe 3 days a week, and also Sunday, we'd get the newspaper, and I'd always read through all the comics. And even back then, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I think part of the reasons that I eventually decided to do comics is that I thought that kind of comic, sort of the comic strip, seemed not that hard. Or specifically, I'd read these newspaper comics, and there were some that were always really good. For example, like Foxtrot, I remember always has a really good joke. And of course, it's hard to do every day. But some of these comics were just truly terrible. And all the love to the creators of these comics. It's hard to do a comic every day, but man, Marmaduke, Kathy, Family Circus, like just you read them and there's almost
fights in our relationship.
yeah, I keep a Marmaduke fan, much to my dismay.
It's dogs, come on.
But even like I can understand that you don't always have a good joke, but some of these comics would more or less not have a joke at all. And I'm wondering how you have these comics that are coming out that are widely publicized. Presumably the creators are making all this money and they're in the biggest newspapers in the world, and they're just not very good. And so in part, I think that was helpful to me because it showed me that you didn't have to be all that good to start making comics. And so that was in the back of my head. I didn't really make any at that point. So it's kind of in the back of my head every time I was reading these comics as I was growing up. As you mentioned, that when I was in Berkeley, I did take this short class in making comics, which was a lot of fun. But I didn't really do anything outside of it for a while after. I didn't like trigger a renaissance in me. And it was only later that I was kind of working as a software engineer, feeling like I was not kind of tapping into that creative side that I liked. I was kind of looking for a hobby a little bit. And I think what probably triggered it is thinking of a few jokes that I thought, oh, this would be good to be a comic. And eventually deciding once I'd sort of collected a few of those, like, well, maybe I can make it be something to make. And so I've been doing that kind of off and on for a few years now. I think I've discovered that it may be true that comics don't always have to be funny, and that there are comics that I still believe are not very funny that are popular. But it is very hard to get popular nonetheless. I don't think my comics have exactly broken into the mainstream, to put it mildly. But I do have an Instagram page that has a handful of followers.
You don't follow anyone back. That's your problem.
And I post the comics there. Yeah, that may be the problem as well.
I would also like to post as a disclaimer to this video that people have different tastes, and it is not that some comics are bad, it is just that they are funny to other people. In the same way that some of your jokes, not your comics are all very funny, but some of your personal jokes, I don't find very funny, and that is okay.
I think I disagree on both counts. I think that some comics are bad, and I don't think it's okay that you find some of my jokes not funny, but we can continue nonetheless.
Okay, so now that my argument has been laid out for me, I think it's really interesting, and what I actually wanted to talk specifically about is like, you have all of these artistic talents, you've made so much work, a lot of artists who are maybe more casual or make less work, like who still consider themselves artists. I don't want to say it's like offensive that you don't consider yourself an artist, but it is strange to hear someone who's like made so much work not identify as an artist. And we talked a little bit about it this morning with one of our friends, that like you often, like if you're in company with a bunch of artists who are artists like full time as their job, like you won't identify as an artist because you have this other career and element to the things that you're interested in. But like, I don't know, like given that you spend so much of your free time like making comics and games, and like you and I have like collaborative projects that we're going to work on whenever we get around to them, like do you really not like internally think of yourself as an artist at all?
I suppose internally, I think more of myself as someone who likes to draw
Yeah.
than someone who is an artist. I mean, I think there is a sort of very inclusive way of talking about art where it is that if you maybe if you draw ever, or if you enjoy doodling sometimes, you're an artist. There's no qualification required. That's kind of what art is. And there's a sort of a romance to that framing of it. But I also think that it maybe generalizes the word a little too much to be useful sometimes.
Yeah.
But it is contextual. What I was talking about this morning is that if I'm in a group of your friends, for example, who maybe are professional artists or are in school to sort of become that, I often think when people are asking if I'm an artist, what they're really asking is art something that you are aspiring to do professionally, or at least sort of semi-professionally, or maybe you're already doing it professionally. And in situations like that, I think it's helpful to say no, because it's true. I'm not. I don't do art professionally. I don't kind of exactly aspire to do it professionally. I do it sort of occasionally, off and on, as a hobby. Although I do think that there is also, and this may be what you're picking up on, a bit of a self-defensive posture as well in saying that I'm not an artist. If you say that you are something, there is a lot of baggage that goes along with that, or at least a lot of expectation. If you say, for example, that you speak another language, it's kind of expected that if someone starts speaking to you in that language, you understand it. But if you say, well, I took some classes in college, but I don't really remember, and then someone starts speaking and you understand it, it's impressive, right? It's impressive versus expected. And so I think some of it is self-defensive as well, that I don't want the expectation of being good at art to be sort of laid upon me. I don't want to claim that. I want others to like sort of like put it on me if they are impressed. So
Yeah,
that's part of it as well.
that's a good way of thinking about it. I do think it's interesting that like art in particular is one of those things that people are self-conscious of in the same way that like when I was graduating, I was in my like one of the last classes for one of my animation classes, and I was like, oh, well, I'm not an animator. And one of the teachers was like, you literally can't say that now that you've taken 10 animation classes and we all know you and we've all been,
Mhm.
grading your animation homework for like 3 years. Like, and I think it's a mental thing for me to be like, now I can say I'm an artist because I have a degree and I can hang it on the wall and I can be like, see here, it's proof I did the thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I think in general, like a lot of artists whose work that I love and admire, yours included, like don't feel comfortable saying that they're an artist. And I wonder why like like art specifically is one of those things. And I wonder if it's like a social thing where like, we're conditioned to think that like being an artist is somehow not higher up because it's artists aren't like well respected in certain ways, but like whether it's like a highfalutin thing or like as someone who
Yeah.
doesn't identify as an artist, like I wonder if you have any sort of thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think your point of kind of credentialing is interesting. You talk about how you now have a degree in art, and therefore it's like, aha, I'm an artist. But I think that most artists, even successful ones, don't do that, or at least there are a lot of artists who don't end up getting an MFA, for example, and that is maybe somewhat unusual in the set of skills. So, for example, I would call myself a software engineer. That's kind of a title, and it maybe comes with some other amounts of baggage. But partly, I feel comfortable saying that because I went to school for computer science and I graduated and I have that credentialing. And then separately, I also have a job where I'm doing that professionally. For a lot of artists, they don't maybe have a degree at all, or at least a degree in art, because it's something you don't necessarily need a degree to do. I think it's a field that's less concerned with that. And also, there are a lot of people who do art less as a profession. They do it maybe part time on the side, or some combination of like maybe they sell some stuff through an Etsy shop, but they have like a main job where they get healthcare, et cetera. And maybe that unclear boundary makes people feel a little less comfortable because it's so unclear what is meant by it.
Yeah. And the hobby thing is kind of interesting because I sort of think that like the things that you do in your spare time are the things that define you. And in a positive way. Like I think in the universe where there's a Luke who does not do art on the side, and is just a computer scientist with like no artistic interests, but other, interests. Like I think there's like a very clear difference between those two versions of you. And I
Yeah.
would be inclined to say that what makes the difference is that you are an artist. Um, and I mean, maybe the similar comparison that we don't need to get too into the weeds to is like if someone says I'm a musician, does that mean you play piano an hour a week? Does it mean you sing in a band? Is the band like, are you like, is the band your job? Like, all of these other sort of elements of the boundary between a hobby and like a career. Um, but I think it makes me a little sad. Like the earlier one of the, me, all of my projects go through many iterations. One of the earlier iterations of this project was a YouTube series that I had called Anyone Can Make Art, where I was like trying to teach people how to draw things on the internet, and it was terrible. It was awful. But the sentiment there is like somewhere on the spectrum between like literally everyone is an artist from childhood onwards to there are very few artists, true artists, somewhere on that spectrum, like, I'd prefer to tip it towards anyone can draw if you practice and if you care. And maybe you won't have like a great eye for things, but it seems more possible that like art is a set of skills that you can develop and it's less of this kind of like, you know, hard to achieve pedestal-y thing.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah, I like what you said about how it's possible that what you do outside of work is more representative of who you are. I mean, I'm very lucky that for the most part, I like my job, but I'd say maybe most people aren't in that situation.
Yeah.
And yet it's probably one of the strongest forms of identity we have. I mean, even at the beginning of this, you asked me to introduce myself. And I've already forgotten what I said, but I can imagine myself saying like, "Oh, I'm Luke. I'm a software engineer." I've said that many times. Or if you're at a party and someone asks, "Oh, what do you do?" The answer you give is what you do professionally. For a lot of people, that's something that they don't really care that much about, and it's true in the sense that they do spend a lot of their hours on this. You spend a lot of your hours at work, but it's interesting and perhaps telling how much emphasis we put on the profession that people are in to kind of define who they are, when maybe the hobbies that they put far fewer hours into are more telling
Yeah.
of what they're interested in and what type of people they are.
And as I am job hunting, oh boy, does that crisis really, really strike a chord with me. And that's part of the reason I chose to be a designer and choose this career path, as somewhat chaotic as it can be. Is like I was trying a bunch of different things, and I was trying things that felt more in line with my interests and who I am as a person, and things that I was just bad at, like physics, and like things that like I could have been really good at, but weren't things that I particularly enjoyed, like working in a law firm. And I've, it's I genuinely want, not in a like kind of radical way, but in just a philosophical way, I wonder what would happen if everyone could just like literally choose to spend 8 hours a day working in a field that was like just their genuine passion and could be like fairly compensated. And like I think you're right, like at least half the population would be doing something different. And that's because you can't really get a job in like painting or Legos or watching television or like playing video games. Like it's hard to find jobs like that are like really joyful and interesting. And you're right, like when you said that you enjoy the work you do, like I think you found something, and you've known for a long time that you wanted to do computer science. Like you enjoy those kinds of puzzles and that kind of work and those kinds of hard problems. Um, and I think it's much harder to like be like I'm going to be an artist and then have like a very clear linear path into a profession, because there's either fewer jobs, you're not paid as well. It's hard to figure out what art is and like what doing art 8 hours a day looks like. um but yeah, I don't know. I think your hobbies are important. I think it tells almost everything about you, like what you choose to do for fun. And you choose to hang out with me, which is nice. So,
And very telling about me.
and very telling about, yes, exactly. Do you think there's anything socially that could be done to get more people to feel comfortable saying they're artists? Like, I know we went to like a figure drawing class, and like that was like very casual, and like even people who were really bad at it, like me, like really enjoyed it. Um, I just wonder, with the advent of AI, whether like there's any way to get people to like even care about like making art anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there are kind of maybe a couple of questions in there. One being if we can get more people interested in self-identifying as artists, regardless of their skill level. And then the second question is, can we get people to actually practice art, especially if some of the traditional reasons for art, namely making something, are less important if AI is capable of taking those jobs. It's an interesting question. I think to the first one, I don't know about I don't quite know how to invoke a social shift in that, but maybe I can convince anyone listening to this that they should self-identify as an artist. From someone who doesn't always do that myself, I can make kind of the bullish argument for why you should self-identify as an artist. Um, and that I mentioned earlier that part of the reason that I don't always is that it puts an added pressure on you, or it can feel that way. But in some sense, I think if you want to get better at something, it is good to put that pressure on yourself. You shouldn't feel pressure to get better at art if you don't want to. But if you sort of, you are what you pretend to be. I think that's is that a quote from someone well known? You are what you pretend to be. And so if you pretend to be an artist, you become that. There's another quote that I don't remember who it's from, but it's a famous sports player, maybe football, who was talking about wanting to get into like the Hall of Fame in their sport, and saying that they wanted to get into the Hall of Fame. So what they imagined is that there was something even beyond the Hall of Fame, like the Super Hall of Fame, and that's what they were going for. They were going for the Super Hall of Fame, something that doesn't even exist, but it's like only the very best from the Hall of Fame are able to get there. And the idea is that if you set these expectations really high of yourself, and you think of yourself in that way, you're like, I'm the type of person who's going to get into the Super Hall of Fame. That kind of mindset is how you improve at something. And so if you think of yourself as an artist, um, that's one way to motivate you to actually, of course, practice art, to actually go out and make drawings, but also to really look at your art and figure out ways that you can hopefully improve. So that's kind of, if you're listening and you're on the fence about categorizing yourself as an artist, maybe you like to draw, but you're like me and you don't always like the the expectation that goes along with it. It might be worth it to categorize yourself like that anyway, and just accept it.
I love it
That'll
when
be
you make
good.
my point for me. It's great. It only took 20 something minutes.
Somehow you're always able to make your point for me. I think you're much better at arguing than I am.
Well, it took a year to get this one to work, and it's on film, so that's nice. I do have a question, which is one I ask myself all the time, but don't have an inherent answer to, which is what gives you the drive to keep making comics? Like when you wake up in the morning and you're like, I'm going to do a comic today, because like your comics are very complicated. Like they require a lot of drawing, a lot of sketching, a lot of coloring. Like it takes you hours to make every individual one. They're not like quick sketches that you do.
Mhm.
And like you don't have a schedule. You don't have like someone nagging you being like, oh, you need to make one every day. There's no monetary incentive as of yet. Um,
Yeah.
like what, how, is it just like a little thingy in your brain that's like, I want to do it? Like, what is it?
Yeah, good question. And yeah, to be clear, there's no monetary. I'm not making any money from this whatsoever. Not even close.
Not yet.
I think that, and I realized I didn't answer your second question about the what how do you motivate people to continue doing art if AI or maybe even other tools
Yeah.
come and replace a lot of the need for it. But I think that the answer to that question and this question may actually be one of the same, which is that when I initially sort of had the idea to do comics, it was really to get the idea of this joke across, just something that I wanted to do. But after I started doing them, what I found was more interesting was the process was enjoyable. It's enjoyable to draw. It's fun, and it's fun in a kind of a slightly mindless way that it's fun to draw. It's not like you're not. It's not like going on a roller coaster. It's not a wild ride here drawing this comic. But I do find that when I've been drawing, it puts me in a good mindset. That at the end of the day, I feel better if I've put some work into art. I feel good while I'm doing it. It's a little like meditating or something in that way. So I do find that the practice of art is valuable, even if, as it is in my case, there are very few people seeing the finished product. I certainly draw a fair bit of the time where I don't necessarily show it to anyone, not as a means of I'm drawing this thing and hiding it because I don't want to show it, but just I'm doodling and there's no purpose to the doodling, and I have fun while I'm doing it, without really a big goal that I'm trying to reach at the end. So I think that's something that maybe not everybody finds in art if it's not something you're interested in. But there's probably something like that that most people find in some activity. You might find it in doing some kind of craft. You might find it in doing music. You might find it in doing like fixing up an old car or something like that. A lot of these tasks are useless to some degree. They might be automatable, but if the purpose of the task is the experience, you can't really automate that. And a robot can't enjoy making art for you, even if it can make art for you.
What a great soundbite. It reminds me very strongly of the Vonnegut quote about like dancing in the shower, singing, dancing in the shower, singing in the shower, dancing in the shower. Dancers don't do that. But like the point of art is to like do the art and to like live and appreciate being alive, and like how it's powerful and important to make art, especially in an era that's kind of like where it's not physically difficult to make art necessarily, but like socially difficult to make art, or it's not appreciated or whatever. And that's like the point of being alive and human. He has another quote where he talks about how we're dancing animals, and like basically like his wife was like, oh, like just go buy envelope online, and he was like, no, I'm going to go out and buy an envelope, and in the process I'm going to meet people, and I'm going to be social, and I'm going to see some great dogs and all this other stuff. And that's like reading his quotes on that, which are like so in line with the stuff you were just talking about, is like very much what got me to be confident enough in the first place to like start a channel like this, to go to art school, to like, you know, a lot of my friends have, this is not an ego thing, but like a lot of my friends have told me that since I've started doing these things, it has encouraged them to make more art or feel more confident saying that they're artists, they're musicians, they're whatever. And that in and of itself has made this worthwhile. Insofar as we're only on Earth for like 100 years or so, it's important to just like make good things and enjoy doing the things and like bake bread and have tea. And this is very quickly, the conversation has gone very wonky downhill. But I think it's important to just, like you said, find the value in your personal physical experiences of making things with your hands. And it's very like different psychological process from, I don't know, like other sort of like non-artistic or non-meditative pursuits. So we only have a couple more minutes. Normally I ask people to give advice to young designers like me starting out, but as someone who is on the fence of identifying as an artist, do you perhaps have some words of wisdom as to how to stay not consistent, but like to keep that spark of joy in art making that you have found, such that you do it in your free time, even when you're so busy dealing with me and other things?
Yeah, I guess maybe I have two pieces of advice. One would be that it's good to find excuses to do art. So I, of course, talked a little bit about the video games I made, and part of the reason I chose those as a side project when I was working just in general, kind of big tech type company, was that they did allow me to do art. I wanted to do some coding on the side because I like doing it. It's kind of separate from my job, but having a project that I could do that also had an art component just really appealed to me. But even outside of that, when I was working at my last job, again, I was working at Credit Karma, which is kind of this fintech company, not exactly an artistic type company. But even within that job, I often found excuses to do a little bit of graphic design work. When I was writing up like a TDD, a technical design doc, for example, you need to have like flowcharts to explain the relationship between objects and stuff like that. I'd sometimes make them in Illustrator, just because it was a tool I was familiar with, but also I could kind of get an excuse to exercise those muscles. Sometimes I'd make like kind of like I did in innovative design. I'd make some like logos and flyer type stuff for intercompany type things. So if we had like a team that we were putting on a presentation, stuff like that. I was surprised at how often design, especially, but art even more generally, has a use even outside of the really obvious places. Even if you're not working in it directly, even if you're doing software engineering like me, something totally separate, you just kind of have to keep an eye out for the opportunities and try to pick them up where they come. So that'd probably be the first thing. I said I had two things, but now, of course, through talking, I've seemed to have forgotten the second one.
That's okay.
Oh, I remember now. I forgot that you can cut this all out and make it seem like I was right off the cuff here. The second one is really advice for any kind of hobby or anything that you want to do, which is that anything you want to do more of, which is that people often ignore the psychological component to starting something or doing something. So they think, for example, if you're trying to work out more, they think, okay, what's the ideal workout to get really strong or something like that? But the best workout is something that you do every day. So the best workout for you to start is something that you enjoy actually doing, because it's much better to like enjoy it and therefore end up doing it every day than it is to do like the perfect quote unquote workout and do it for 5 days and then never want to do it again because you hate it. I think it's the same thing with art, which is that when you're doing art, it's, there are all these things about like, how do you practice art to get better? Oh, you have to like try all these different styles to like keep up to date. You have to do all this other stuff. Maybe you need like to work in materials you don't always work in and you don't like all that kind of stuff for, might be good if you're in art school and really trying to get better and it's like your main thing. But the most important thing is just do the art. And so if you have something you enjoy, just focus on that. Focus on actually doing it, and therefore find the thing that you actually want to do, and keep it to that.
Sounds perfect. And with that, we are literally out of time. So thank you for joining me. I am glad that you are now possibly considering identifying more as an artist and having less shame and defensiveness.
Yeah, you didn't even record this. This was all just to convince me.
Oh my God, I'm gonna do this for everything now. No, it's wonderful to talk to you about these things as we do every day. So thank you,
Yeah, of
and
course.
I will
And
talk to you.
I did remember, by the way, the name of the quote I mentioned earlier, "You are what you pretend to be." I'm pretty sure it's a Vonnegut quote. So we really did
Ooh,
come all the way around. It turns
there
out
we go.
that you finish this interview and you desperately want more, or just want something else that's good. Definitely read Kurt Vonnegut, because it turns out that all of our ideas are borrowed secondhand from him, or at least all of mine.
Ditto. So it's perfect. So thanks again.